Chapter 4, Early Development, Physical Development. So in this section, we're going to discuss an overview of physical development, physical milestones in early childhood, physical growth, motor development, and health issues. So an overview of physical development. Well, physical development is the growth from birth to adulthood, and it's the refinement of gross and fine motor skills. It's the progress of one's control of their body. So, in early childhood, there's a lot of physical milestones that are occurring. So, let's look at an overview of what's going on. So, infants, for instance, they were getting that control of holding their head, being able to use their arms and their legs, being able to sit and stand, exploring positions, so rolling, standing, cruising, all of those good things. They were also learning to squirm, roll, scoot, crawl, cruise, and walk. Now, as they move into toddlerhood and into preschool, which is the early childhood range, they're starting to really get balance and coordination, being able to repeat movements on their own without this being a trial or error type thing. It's becoming more ingrained and a learned behavior. They're able to coordinate their arms and legs at the same time to do things like climbing and pushing, so they could push a stroller or ride on a riding toy. And they're also able to move into independence, so they don't necessarily have to be carried around during toddlerhood. It's a lot of I want to do it myself. Now, as they go into preschool, they're starting to develop stamina and body strength, so they're able to run on uneven surfaces. They're able to hop and jump. They're able to catch and throw. But again, a lot of these things depend on their practice and their experiences with it. They're able to use balls and throw, slide, pedal toys, and use technology. And they're also able to bend over and touch their toes, change things from one hand to the other hand with with not a lot of effort. Whereas when they were younger, they had to really concentrate on their hand and the object that they were trying to move or place. So, a couple of other things that are happening. So, in infancy, they're using both of their hands and they're exploring different textures and holding and transferring objects from one hand to another. And they're also developing that pincher grasp where they are picking up objects with their thumb and their forefingers. And then as they get older, they're starting to be able to hold things a little bit differently, a lot more like we can. So they're learning their hand-eye coordination, so they're able to take things apart and put it together. They're able to feed themselves, fill containers, able to pick up things, stack things, roll a ball, turn pages in a board book in toddlerhood. But as they move into preschool, they're able to use normal page books. They're able to use simple tools such as a crayon for scribbling or eating a little bit more. So as they move into older toddlerhood, they're able to complete puzzles, thread beads, able to start molding Play-Doh, which is actually a very hard task for them to do because they don't have a lot of strength in their hands. But using things like Play-Doh and stress balls is very helpful for them to build any type of muscles in their hands, which in turn is going to help them as they acquire strength and control and dexterity in their hands to be able to hold a pencil or to be able to color within the lines. So instead of them doing the fist grasp where they're holding it with their whole hand, they're able to use proper um, pencil holding and utensil holding techniques. And as they get into older preschool, they're starting to be able to write. And what we see looks a little bit more legible than their early fine motor skills. They're also able to do self-help skills, so things like buttoning, zipping, snapping, and pouring things. However, again, all of these motor skills depend on their experiences and if their parents and caregivers give them the opportunity to try these things. So a lot of children, as they move into middle childhood, may not be able to do some of these things because they weren't allowed to do it on their own. So building autonomy is a very big deal during this age. So, physical development in early childhood. Well, first off, growth is at half the rate of what it was in infancy. So, their growth has slowed down. And as bones and muscles grow, it's also causing them to have a lengthening in their body. So, the average child will grow about 3 inches per year, and their weight comes from their muscles and their bone tissues, and they average about 4 pounds per year. Their body proportions are also changing. So, as their bones and muscles grow, there's a gradual lengthening, and children are beginning to look more skinny and athletic with long limbs and tight abdominals. However, their abdomen is still quite pronounced at this age, so they may look like they have a little bit of a pot belly, but as they grow and they get taller, they become more skinny and more lengthy looking. Their bodies are also very disproportional. Their head and their face look a little too large for their body, so they still are very prone to head injuries. And especially when they're leaning over to try to get something, they may fall forward because their head is bigger than their body. So their bones are starting to grow faster, and they may have a lanky appearance by age 6. Weight gain comes from an increase in muscles. So their metabolism of their fatty tissue is acquired in infancy, whereas before they were still developing that. So they're starting to consume things for energy, and they're becoming a lot more active, and they don't have to eat as often as they did when they were infants because they're able to consume the material throughout the day for energy and store it. During this time, teeth development is a big deal. So, deciduous teeth, those are the primary or the first set of 16 teeth that erupt when an infant is between 5 and 7 and 1.5 months of age. So, there's 16 main teeth that are erupted, and you can kind of see over here the months that it happens and what they are called. And then as they move into middle childhood, they start shedding those baby teeth and their permanent teeth come in. But at the beginning, they only have 16 main teeth. So things like their wisdom teeth are not part of this. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen as they move. So they get their teeth during early childhood and infancy, and then they move to shedding them during middle. So the brain, during this time in early childhood, an age 3 brain is about 75% of its adult weight. And at age 6, the brain is about 90% of its adult weight. So there's a lot of things that are happening during this early childhood phase that can really have impact on their cognitive development, because this is where their brain is developing rapidly, and they have to get all these different sensory things. They need to be read to, they need language, all of these things during this time, because this is where the most of their brain development is happening. So these increases are primarily due to the growth in the neuron size, the increase in cells, and the myelination of axons. So there's a lot of things happening, but again, the most important thing is for them to be stimulated cognitively so that their brain develops and gives them the best chance in the future as they become middle childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. So brain circuitry is established in early childhood, and it's kind of like a sculptor. So the brain is constantly pruning and changing. So it's getting rid of unnecessary access neuron connections constantly. So it's constantly changing and growing during this stage. So myelination makes certain brain functions possible. So it's rapid and more efficient, such as speech, sensory perception, and logical thought. Myelin is a fatty material deposited around the axons. And again, during this time, there's this constant shedding and changing in the brain. So by age 4, the area of the brain for hand-eye coordination is fully functional, and the area of the brain for facilitating focus and attention is fully functional by age 10, which is in middle childhood. So it kind of explains why young children cannot focus and they have to be constantly redirected, and also getting small amounts of information at one time. You wouldn't have an hour or 2 hour lecture with 4 and 5 year olds because they wouldn't be able to hold that attention. And then the area of the brain for regulating skilled language is fully mature by age 15. So this also explains why young children can't understand things like sarcasm and figurative language because they don't have all the different skilled languages that they're going to have when they become adolescents. And because of these improvements, children are ready for formal education around the age of 6 because they're starting to get those skills to be able to turn the pages in the book, hold a pencil, starting to learn how to write. But when they're younger, they're not necessarily ready for formal instruction at that time. So about kindergarten age. So brain specialization and coordination. So brain lateralization refers to the fact that we have two halves of our brain. And these two halves of the brain are not exactly alike. Now, some of you may have heard when you were in school, you're a left brain thinker or a right brain thinker. However, this is not true. It is not true because both halves of your brain are constantly communicating across each other. So if we kind of look right here, we can see. So the left hemisphere controls writing and movement of the right side of your body, and then the right hemisphere controls your left side of your body, which is something that most of us may or may not have known. However, we have to have both sides of our brains working at the same time, or we would not be able to control both sides of our bodies. So, perceptual skills. Vision and hearing are primarily established by 6 months of age, but they are refined. So, if we go back and think about what we learned in infancy and toddlerhood, their vision was very poor. However, it was becoming fine-tuned. Same thing with their hearing. As they got older, it got better and better and better. However, if not, then they may need things like corrective lenses and things like that. So during early childhood, some of the refinements are eyeballs do continue to grow until puberty. Young children do tend to be farsighted, which means that they'll move an object closer. So moving the object closer makes vision worse for farsighted, so they may move it away so that they can see it better. So the ability of the eye to focus improves, but again, they may be farsighted at the beginning. And even with these improvements, children can still not see clearly. Now, by age 6, most children see at 20/30, and 20/30 is this line right here. However, normal eyesight is considered 20/20. Again, younger children, depending on where their eyesight is, may need corrective lenses, especially if they're squinting, because that can cause them to have a lot of issues and headaches. But also it can hinder their ability to read what's on the board or to learn letters correctly and things like that. So we're going to pause and we're going to process and go back and review the slides as needed to answer these questions. So motor development. So fine motor skills, again, deal with the small muscles, dealing with our hands and our feet. Gross motor is large movements. They use our arms, our legs, our feet, our trunk. So during this time, development changes really follow that skills develop from the core, the trunk, to the extremities. So fine motor skills are becoming more refined because of this, because they're growing in terms of they have control of their head and their neck and their body, and now they're working on those small skills that deal with their fingers and their feet. So gross motor skills, like we said, involve large muscle groups. So things like throwing objects, walking, running, climbing. Now, with the establishment of the nerves and the practice of speed, balance is a big thing that is a little bit more balanced in early childhood. But again, it depends on practice and experience with doing some of these things. So some things that are happening gross motor skills wise. 2 to 3 year olds are able to jump, and jumping is where you use both feet on the floor, whereas a hop is where you are on one foot, which takes a lot of balance. They're able to throw and catch rigidly with their upper body. So they use their trunk and their chest, and then their arms will come in. They're able to also push riding toys and they with little steering. So they're able to get things going. 3 to 4 year olds, they can jump and hop too, but it's become more refined. So they may be able to jump 10 times on or 10 times and hop 10 times, whereas when they were younger, they may have only been able to do it 5 times. They're throwing their catches with slight upper body involvement, so they may not use their chest as much. And now they're able to pedal and steer tricycles, which involves hand movements and feet movements, and also not throwing yourself off balance from left to right. From 4 to 5 year olds, they're able to run more smoothly. They can gallop and skip. So galloping is where you have one foot in front of you that's straight, and you have another foot that's behind you, but it's at an angle. And then throws are increased with body rotation. So they're able to pivot their body to throw things. Whereas before it was maybe with both hands, only in a forward motion. 5 to 6 year olds, they increase in running speed. Their throwing is more mature, and they're catching. So they don't really use their chest to catch or both hands. They may be able to do it with one hand now. And they ride bicycles with training wheels. Fine motor skills are those hand-eye skills related to the use of the fingers and the hands, but it could also be with the feet. So these things are things that are needed for self-dressing, feeding, and playing with toys. So 2 to 3 year olds, they're able to put and remove simple items of clothing. So that's why a lot of clothing for that age are either pull on or you pull on shorts with elastic, not a lot of buttons, not a lot of fasteners and things like that. They can also use large zippers, but again, it depends on their practice. And then they can use a spoon efficiently. By 3 to 4 year olds, they should be able to fasten and unfasten large buttons. They can serve self food without help. They can use scissors, but again, it's very rough and it depends on their experience. And they can also draw first pictures of people that look more people-like than the scribbles. 4 to 5 year olds, they can use a fork efficiently, and they can cut with scissors following a line. They can also copy shapes and some letters. However, if they've never had experience with that, they may not be able to do that until later. 5 to 6 year olds, they can use a knife. Again, that's a safe knife, like a butter knife or a plastic knife. They should be able to tie their shoes. They can draw more detailed people, and they can copy numbers and simple words. Again, all of these are practice-oriented skills. So the more they practice, the more refined they're going to be. And they may be able to do some of these skills earlier if they have practice. However, if they don't have practice, then they may be developmentally behind in regard to these skills. So bilateral coordination is something that is very prominent in early childhood. And this is the coordination of using both sides of the body to perform fine and gross motor skills. Now, without this, children look clumsy. They drop items. They may prefer one-handed activities because it only involves focus and attention and practice with one side. Whereas switching hands and using a helper hand with your dominant hand, that's a lot harder to do. Now, bilateral coordination activities really are essential for the coordination and the fluid of movements of the body. So it's that practice of doing these things. So some gross motor activities that require bilateral skills are things like jumping and skipping. Well, jumping, you use both feet. Skipping as well. So when you're using both your left foot and your right foot and your knees, that is a bilateral skill because it requires you to use both sides. Riding a bike, well, holding and pedaling with the left and the right, catching a ball. Swimming, beating a drum, pushing and pulling, and sports. Those are all examples of gross activities that need both sides of the body to be successful. Now, fine motor skills, activities that require bilateral skills, are things like tying your shoes. You have to use your hand, your left and your right hand, and you have to be able to alternate and move your hands around to do that. Tying shoes is a very difficult task for some of them. Threading beads, using a knife and a fork, cutting with scissors, doing buttons, lacing activities, using a ruler, all of writing. All of these require the coordination of both sides of the body. But again, practice is what makes perfect. So, bilateral coordination activities. So, symmetrical movements. These require both hands or feet do the same thing at the same time. So, things like rolling a rolling pin, pushing a wheelbarrow, jumping, clapping hands, putting on socks. It requires both at the same time. They're not doing different tasks. Now, reciprocal or alternating movements. This is when you use two extremities in alternating motions. So, pulling a rope. Well, your hands have to go one way and your legs have to go another way. Pedaling a bike, holding with your hands, pedaling with your feet, but also your feet are going at different times. One foot's going forward, one foot's going back. Dominant hand and non dominant hand. This is where you use one hand to perform a task while the other hand assists. So both hands need to work together smoothly. So things like dressing oneself. Well, one hand may be holding while one hand's doing the button or the zipper. Writing, holding the paper and writing. Drawing, coloring, cutting with scissors. One hand's holding the paper, one hand's holding the scissors. Tying shoes, threading beads, using a ruler. So one hand would use the ruler, one hand would use the pencil. So hand skills. Hand skills are the ability to explore and manipulate objects with hands. Now, by early childhood, most children are using the pinch or grasp for picking up objects. So this grasp is the foundation for all other tools such as pencils, color utensils, eating utensils. So the pinch or grasp, this is what it would look like in terms of holding like a pencil. However, some children have trouble with this. So there's a lot of accommodations and tools out there to help them with holding a pencil correctly or in the best way that's comfortable. Same thing with holding utensils and objects. So art skills. Art skills provide an early foundation for later skills that are vital to academic success. Now, young children see the world differently than adults. And a lot of adult artists try to replicate these things in abstract art forms. Now, scribbling is the foundation of artistic ability. So if we look right here, at ages 2, scribbling is the foundation. So if we come and we look at some of their artwork, scribbling is the foundation of them understanding what is going on. However, the scribbles start to form into objects. So by 3 years, this is where they're starting to use symbols to represent things in their scribble format. So as we can see, this is a person for a 2-year-old, and they'll tell you this is a person. However, when we move to 3-year-olds, you can kind of see the formation of a head, maybe some arms, and some legs. However, by 4 years, pictures tell stories for them. So they're starting to really add details to their pictures, especially pictures of people. So things like eyelashes, hair, clothing, fingers, shoes. And then by 6 years, they're starting to add landscapes. So not only do their people have those details from 4-year-olds, but also being able to focus on more than one aspect of the picture. So things like drawing buildings or drawing the sky or drawing trees or the sun. A lot of children love to draw the sun with the smiley face up at the top. So adding more details to their art. But it all starts from scribbling. So we're going to stop and we're going to process again. So go back and review the slides as needed to address these questions. So health issues. Well, nutritional needs is one of the foundations for everybody. So, nutrition, physical changes, and psychosocial development are closely aligned. Now, at this age, they have less demanding appetites than infants, primarily because their digestion and everything is now working well. And serving sizes for smaller should be smaller for this age group than for adults. However, a lot of parents don't realize, or caregivers don't realize, how much a portion really should be. So there's lots of guidelines that can help with this. So things like McDonald's Happy Meals, for instance, typically have about 4 nuggets when they really actually only need 3. Same thing with their sizes of starches and vegetables. It should be higher in vegetables and less in starches. So they can also start to regulate their own food intake. However, they do start to form opinions of what they like to eat and what they don't like to eat. However, again, this is based off of experience, what parents give them, how parents react when they eat. Do they give in to picky eaters, or do they try to incorporate new foods into their diet? So, picky eaters may avoid food that is unfamiliar, and that can cause friction with some parents, especially considering wasting food and how expensive food may be. Also, they may like a food for a little bit and then they dislike it the next day. So, tips for promoting healthy eating habits is one, letting them explore food and food choices. Trying all these different things, not always getting the same thing every time. Also, making sure that you keep serving sizes small, especially when introducing a new food to them. Also, not nagging them to eat. They can tell you when they're hungry and when they're not hungry. Also, avoiding unhealthy snacks and empty calorie foods because these can cause overeating, which also provides inadequate nutrition and can lead to obesity. And we also have to be very mindful of what they see on TV as well in regards to commercials and what is targeted at their age group. So, obesity is defined as a body mass index and 2 standard deviations above the average BMI. So, it's body weight that exceeds 20% of what's considered appropriate for one's age. Approximately 12.4% of US preschool age children are obese. And a lot of this is caused by what they eat, what is projected at them in regards to media, their TV, their computer intake. So, are they sedentary or are they active? What their parents eat. Also, things like um, their exercise and what they do. So, there's a lot of causes of obesity. It is believed to be a combination of genetics, behavioral, and environmental factors. So, genetic factors are what they are born with. There are certain generations and genetic makeups that do cause people to be more obese than others. Behavioral factors also are things about how much calories you're intaking and the physical activity. And then environmental factors are the influence of the family, childcare, school in establishing eating and exercise habits. Now, with that said, family does have one of the greatest impacts on environmental factors because when children come into schools, especially public schools, they have healthy and safe eating criteria in there. However, a lot of children, and you may be one of these, did not like school food, thought it tasted bad, didn't want to eat it. However, that's because of the influence you had in culture, family, and what was seemed appropriate to eat. However, if those healthy eating habits are in family and in culture, when they come to school, it's not as dramatic of a change to go to healthy eating. So there's a big balance between all these different things, but a lot of it comes from environment and the behaviors that we have in regard to what we eat and how active we are. So, outcomes associated with being overweight or obese. Well, negative self image and body image is one of the biggest ones. It can cause bullying, being rejected, or being seemed unpopular. It can help in developing unhealthy eating habits for a lifetime, which can cause health issues in the present and in the future. So, preventing obesity. Well, one of the first steps is breaking old eating habits and establishing healthy eating habits. Now, that's easier said than done for most of us. However, doing little changes is a big one. So instead of eating potatoes and mashed potatoes, eating cauliflower potatoes instead. Or instead of eating rice, eating cauliflower rice. Or instead of having a little Debbie snack, eating fruit. There's lots of different things that can be. And a lot of dieters will, instead of a candy bar, they'll eat a banana because bananas are sweet too. But it all depends on your preferences and what you can eat. Now, having an active lifestyle and exercising is another part too. However, that can be different for different people based on their exposure and their ability to get to this. But just taking a walk is one of the first ways of being active. Getting outside and playing with children at this age is another way. Also, being aware of your calorie intake. So, for children at this age, it's required for them, ages 2 to 3, to only have 1,060 calories a day. Well, a lot of our fast food meals are very much higher. So it kind of leads to what they're eating will impact their overall well being. So we got to be very mindful of what's going into their body. Same thing with sugary yogurts and all these little things that children love, cookies. So making sure that it's very helping them to understand and giving them different options. Not saying they should never have cookies, but cookies not 3 times a day. So maybe having cookies and then having fruit and then having a vegetable later as a snack. Also providing healthy role models for eating and exercise. So educating them about healthy eating habits and providing them with quick, easy, healthy snacks and meals. So having it ready for them. So having their fruit in a baggie ready for them to grab and just eat. And also avoiding watching TV and eating because you don't realize how much you're putting into your body. So, pediatric psychology. This is the area of psychology that studies the interactions of relationships among health, illness, physical development, cognitive, and social emotional development over a lifetime. And these researchers are really focusing on things like issues in health and how children understand and cope with illness. So, understanding illness has stages. And how a child understands illness is dependent on their cognitive processing. Now, when they're young, they're in 2 stages, which is phenomenism, which is understanding illness as an external concrete phenomenon. So it's removed from the condition of the illness. So at this age, a young child may say that you catch the chicken pox from a space shuttle in space. They really don't understand how you get it. However, contagion is the next phase. So they understand illness as caused by people and objects that are, but not touching. So they know that it's caused by people or objects, but not touching. So they believe that they can get sick by just being around someone, but not that somebody has to touch them to be sick. So they think things like cold, flu, headaches, and heart attacks are caused by being around someone and not by them touching or sneezing on you. And 50% of 4-year-olds do display this type of thinking. But again, it's based off of experience and how they've been taught about illnesses. So also things like, if you sneeze, wash your hands so that when you touch something, you don't get somebody else sick and things like that. So immunizations is another big thing that needs to be talked about in early childhood. And immunizations help prevent most dangerous illnesses in childhood. However, some people are allergic to the ingredients, so they may not be vaccinated because of that. However, there is that debate about autism, and a lot of parents are not wanting to get their children vaccinated because they're afraid that it may cause autism. However, this has not been proven true. And as a result, a lot of these old diseases are starting to show up in modern society again. So if we kind of look here, we can kind of see what's going on. So if no one is immune, the disease is going to spread very quickly, which is one of the reasons vaccinations were created in the first place. However, as some people decide that they want to get vaccinated or not, contagion can still spread through the population, but not as dramatically per se as people that are not getting vaccinated at all. But if most people get immunized, the spread is more contained. So, common physical illnesses during early childhood. Colds and flu is one of the most common. However, things like pink eye and ear infections are also very common. Now, in other countries, diarrhea, malaria, and pneumonia are also a major concern. Infectious diseases can also occur, especially if there's a lack of vaccinations. And then lack of resistance due to the lack of natural antibody protection. So they are more susceptible because they're still building these antibodies and their organs are still maturing. So at daycare and preschool, when one child gets sick, a lot of children get sick very quickly because they, one, don't understand how illnesses are spread, and two, they don't have the immune system of middle childhood going into adolescence. Now, also a lack of health insurance can lack in care. So a child may come to school sick because they can't afford to go to the doctor or they don't have insurance. So chronic physical illnesses. Now, a lot of these are caused by genetic diseases that that are developed from conception and birth, and it can be present and can last a lifetime. But other diseases such as cancer, food allergies, diabetes may show up during early childhood. Pediatric AIDS is one of the most advancing and rapidly cause of death in young children because its contact is through the utero and during breastfeeding. However, there's a lot of improvement in safety procedures for delivery and feeding today, and also antiviral medication, but it's something that is really going to impact a child for the rest of their life. Some other things that pop up are things like ADHD, epilepsy and seizures, autism as well. Mental illness is another thing that starts to become more seen in early childhood, but also in middle, adolescence, and adulthood. Now, a mental disorder can include harmful behavior, unrealistic thoughts and perceptions, inappropriate emotions, and unpredictable behavior. And it can range from mild to severe. Now, it is estimated that 20% of all children and adolescents have at least one mental disorder. And there's many, many different categories of mental disorders. So things like ADHD or ADD, anxiety, mood, eating disorders, autism. So ADD and ADHD. So these are a disorder that causes children to be highly distractible if they're ADD and energetic if they have ADHD. So the biggest difference between these two is ADD is the distractible only, and then ADHD is distractible and energetic. Now, this is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, leading to difficulty regulating attention. Now, if we go back to brain development, 10 years old is when they can really focus their attention. So a lot of ADD and ADHD is early and prematurely diagnosed, and there's other interventions that can be put in place. However, for some children, it is going to interfere with their education and their ability to function, especially in a classroom or a preschool or daycare setting. So some parents and doctors will talk about different options at first, and then they may go to a psychotropic medication. So it also leads to, so the causes in the brain and the chemical imbalances also cause impulsivity and hyperactivity, but it really depends on which diagnosis, if it's ADD or if it's ADHD. So impulsivity is the experiences difficulty waiting for their turn. They have trouble waiting until a question is finished before answering, so they may blurt out. They interrupt a lot, and they may be like they're wound by a motor. So they have no insight of danger. They're just go, 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 go. Hyperactivity, on the other hand, is when children may squirm or fidget when they're sitting. They may not be able to stay seated. They may get up constantly, or they may walk around a lot. They have trouble playing quietly, so they may have trouble with their volume control even after being redirected. They may be restless and always on the move, and they may talk excessively. Now, inattention, this is when they have trouble following directions or finishing tasks. They have trouble with organization. They forget about things and lose things. Their short-term memory problems, and they're forgetful. And they may have a tendency to daydream or to daze off. And it's averaged that about 5% of children are diagnosed with ADHD. But again, at this early stage, focusing on that attention aspect, again, the brain is not fully developed to be able to really focus on attention until about the age of 10. So autism. Autism is a lot of different things. So they may have trouble with interacting socially, organizing or planning problems. They may have trouble with understanding behaviors or emotions. They may be very nonverbal, and they may have great distress or difficulty when things are changed or different. So some signs of autism are things like inappropriate playing with toys, not being able to relate to others. So when somebody's crying, they may not realize that that means sad. They may be hyperactive or passive. They may inappropriately cry or laugh. They may be oversensitive to sounds and light. They may have attachment to objects. They may have poor speech or lack speech, so a lot of nonverbal type things. And they may have difficulty with going back and forth between a routine. So, for instance, in school, if there was a pep rally or something and it went against the typical classroom day, they may not be able to cope. But also the noise level in assemblies and things like that may be overstimulation for them. So they may give them headphones or noise canceling headphones to kind of help them focus, or they may put them in a different environment and let them watch it on TV. But they really try to include them in as much as possible. And then lastly, lack of attention and awareness to danger. And a lot of these are very common with ADD and ADHD. So understanding the extreme of it and which one it is can be a little difficult at times, but they monitor for many different aspects. And autism kind of deals more with the social emotional aspect and feelings and being able to communicate, whereas autism is more not being able to pay attention, but being able to communicate, or being hyperactive or impulsive, but still being able to communicate and be aware of other people's emotions. So safety is a big concern during early childhood, and accidents are the leading cause of death in early childhood and a lot of any age, really. Now, supervision is crucial. Watching children is one of the most important things. Childproofing is still very important, making sure that things are out of the way. And then educating about dangerous situations, so stranger danger, not climbing things, not being able to use things that aren't proper for their age, so things like the stove and the microwave, supervising them during bath time, making sure that if you have firearms in the house that they're locked up. There's lots of ways that you can prevent children from hurting themselves. And then air and water pollution are also an issue of concern as well. So, promoting wellness with childcare. Well, quality childcare is low teacher ratios and small group sizes, having appropriate learning activities, engaging in safe learning environments, activities that support them developmentally, and quality staff and professional development opportunities. Now, depending on the socioeconomic status or where a person lives, having quality health care could become an issue because they may not be able to afford it and may have to choose other things, or it may be a longer commute, or the hours may not work. So here are a lot of different types of childcare. So you have your licensed childcare centers, religious, certified preschools, licensed home, voluntary home, family daycare system, unregulated, family day home, and unregulated as well. Now, some of these are licensed and regulated, some of them are not, especially when you get down here to the bottom. Now, voluntary registered home daycares are only regulated. Same thing with certified preschools, but not some certified preschools are licensed as well. So having a license is very important because that means that there's certain guidelines and standards they have to abide by. Whereas regulated just means that they're checked periodically, but they're not necessarily bound to doing certain things or certain curriculums. They can pick their own curriculum. Whereas licensed, they may have to do a certain curriculum. Now, the capacity. One thing for quality childcare is having low teacher to child ratios. Well, in a lot of these, there's not a maximum capacity. So they can have 20 children at one time. Now, typically they don't have that. They'll have more than one worker or teacher if that occurs. But home daycares, they're only allowed to have 12, whereas voluntary is a maximum of 5. So there are some strict guidelines on how many, but a lot of these can have as many children as, but they just have to have more teachers depending on what their license and their regulations are. Monitoring. Well, some of these are monitored and some of them are not. Some of them are also monitored through online and video. Some of them are only if there's a complaint. And then some are twice a year. So it all depends, but knowing these different things is very important. And then also knowing who's the agency that handles these complaints. And every state has their own Department of Social Services and things that will regulate and handle any complaints and investigations that there is. So child abuse is another thing that we have to address in early childhood. So child abuse is anything that can cause harm to a child physically, sexually, emotionally, or neglect. So anything that can hurt them cognitively, physically, socially, emotionally. Now, as we make relationships and we have safe environments, we want to make sure that children get the best care as possible. However, sometimes emotions can get in the way, or may not be able to afford a certain child care center and you have to go with another option. But there's lots of ways that parents can be aware of child abuse, but also how other caregivers that deal with children can be aware of what may be occurring at the home. So making sure that there's open communication with the child is very important so that the child feels like they can talk about what's going on. Also explaining the concept of protecting private areas and using correct terminology. That is a very important thing, but a lot of parents they use cute words, or they'll say it in a certain way that children, if somebody asks them, did somebody touch you here, they don't know what that is because their parent may call it their flower or something like that. Also, being suspicious of adults who want to spend too much time with the child, especially the child alone. Also, demanding an open door policy during lessons, practices and daycare so that you're aware of what's going on. And when a child says they're uncomfortable or they start showing anxiety and they don't want to go, stop and listen and ask them what's going on. Because a lot of times young children don't know how to express themselves. So if they're starting to say, well, I don't want to go or I don't like it anymore, there may be something that's going on. Also, learning how to report abuse is very important and who you must report it to. Explaining that any touching that feels unsafe is unsafe. So if they don't like it, make sure that they tell you that so and so touched me and I didn't like it. And they can tell that person to stop as well, but making sure that they have that open communication is very important. So, teaching the difference between healthy and unhealthy secrets is another thing because children don't necessarily know that they should tell at times. And then never leaving children alone, and especially in high risk locations. So, cars, hotels, dorm rooms, classrooms, locker rooms, bathroom stalls. There are certain places where adults should never go with the child. So, they need to be aware of that. So, poverty and hunger is another thing that really impacts early childhood. So, economic issues should be considered because there's some children that live in what we call food deserts. And this is any rural community or urban neighborhood that doesn't have access to fresh, healthy, and affordable food, which means they have to drive to the nearest grocery store. But a lot of times, people that have economic issues may not have a car or may not be able to do that. So, being able to get to healthy food can be a big issue. So, they may end up going to the convenience store, which some convenience stores have apples and bananas and things like that, but they don't necessarily always look good. And then also, it's expensive compared to buying Little Debbie cakes or getting something that could be shared with more people. So making sure that it's really apparent about they may just not have access to it. So they're doing the best that they can. Also, another thing about food deserts is a lot of fast food may pop up around that area too. And a lot of fast food places are connected to gas stations now, which is very convenient, but it also causes unhealthy eating habits when they don't have access to cars and transportation to get to healthy and affordable food. Now, hunger statistics: 1 in 6 Americans struggle with hunger, and 1 in 5 children in America live below the poverty line. So, a lot of households are food insecure. They may not know. And 16 million children struggle with hunger. Now, a lot of schools are combating this by having free lunch, reduced lunch. In South Carolina, especially in Darlington County, everybody gets free lunch. And a lot of schools are starting to follow that trend. But that's during the school years. So, a lot of schools and a lot of church organizations and just organizations in general do things like Meals on Wheels, or they have a food truck, or they have lunch during the summers, or they send children home with food so that they are fed and taken care of, because no one wants a child to go hungry. And here are a lot of poverty and hunger resources out there that can help as well. So, medical care is another thing. And during this time, this deals with things like the dentist, going to checkups, getting annual eye exams, and immunizations. Now, again, depending on transportation issues and finances, they may not be able to afford insurance. And medical care is very, very expensive. So, things like Medicaid, Medicare, there's a lot of things in place to help with this, but again, if they don't have transportation, it's kind of hard for them to get to the medical care checkups and things. So, oral health, there's a lot of dangers. So, things like losing teeth, heart disease, bad breath, strokes, there's a lot of things that can happen. Same thing with well checks. If you don't get it, then the child may not be immunized. or they may have an underlying issue that hasn't been addressed. So making sure to know when to take children for checkups. So at the beginning, when they're little, they go every month for month 1 and month 2, and then it starts spacing out every 2 months, and then every 3 months, and then it keeps going. And then when they become 3 years of age, then it becomes an annual checkup to make sure that everything's up to date. And here's just an overview of immunizations to show how many doses they get, when do they get it, and things like that. Now, vision problems, there's 1 in 4 children that have vision problems, and vision problems can lead to a lot of learning difficulties because in our society, we learn a lot through words and teachers writing things on the board or projecting something. And children that have eyesight difficulty, they may not be able to keep up with what's going on because they can't see it. Same thing with hearing. If they can't hear, it's hard to learn. If they can't see, it's hard to learn. Same thing if they're hungry, it's hard to learn. So all of these things really impact their wellness and their well-being and need to be thought about in regards to early childhood. So we're going to pause and we're going to process again to address these questions. And that is the end of this section.